Okay, so today's lesson is on the cognitive approach to explain depression. The main idea behind the cognitive approach is that it believes that depression is caused by our irrational thoughts, and it's this emotional state that causes us to feel depressed. There are a number of cognitive explanations of depression, and they all basically say that there is some disturbance in thinking. Whether we have some negative thoughts, irrational beliefs, misinterpretation of events, all of these things are going to go along to cause depression. Beck's theory. His theory were, firstly, that people have faulty information processing. They have irrational and faulty thinking, which leads people to only see the negative aspects of a situation. So they will only, for example, see... So let's have a look at Beck's theory. He thought of it in a three-part theory. First off, he said that depression came from this faulty information processing. So you weren't seeing the world in the same way as everybody else. You were having irrational and faulty thinking, which you only see the negative aspects of a situation. So say, for example, on a test, you get 8 out of 10 and the teacher says you've done a really good job, you've worked really, really hard. Someone who is depressed might say, yeah, but I got 2 wrong. So rather than thinking, yay, I got 8 out of 10, they'd be like, oh, I got 2 wrong. And the next 2 parts to his theory are negative self-schemas and negative cognitive triad, which we're going to look at in more detail. Okay, so let's have a look at negative triad. Beck says there's 3 types of negative thinking cause a person to develop a dysfunctional view of the world. And when someone is depressed, these thoughts come quite often to them. So they'll have a negative view of themselves. I'm worthless, I'm ugly, I'm a failure, I'm never going to be any good at anything. Okay? They have a negative view of their future. Because I'm so silly and because I'm so ugly, I'll never get married, I'll never have children, good things will never happen to me. And then they have a negative view of the world's a depressingly horrible place, nobody loves me, society's falling apart. And it's this combination of all these thinking that can cause someone to become depressed. They also have developed negative schemas, which they could have acquired during their childhood and their adolescence. For example, like, no one likes me, life sucks, there's nothing to look forward to, I hate myself, things are so unfair. And these schemas are developed quite often because the child has experienced a negative life event. So, for example, loss of a parent, rejection of peers, criticism by parents, criticism by teachers, and sadly, physical and emotional abuse. All of these things can lead them to have a negative schema about life and relationships. Let's take an example. So this is a healthy interpretation of a negative event. Bad things happen, it's part of life. So here's Chris, he gets dumped by his girlfriend. Here's his non-depressive interpretation. There's plenty more fish in the sea, I can always go and get myself another girlfriend. Well, she wasn't really right for me anyway. Oh, thank God, no more nagging, I can go out with my mates whenever I like. Basically, I'm sad at the moment, but I'm going to get over it. Whereas a depressed person, this is going to hit them in a very different way. So let's have a look at it in terms of Beck's negative triad. So, the self, for example. I'm not surprised I've been dumped. I was never good enough for her anyway. I'm so awful. I'm ugly, I've got loads of spots, etc., etc. The future. How am I ever going to find anyone in my life? I'm always going to be lonely. And the world, for example. People don't like me. They never give me a chance. No one's going to realise what a good person I am, or how a nice partner I could be. The next one that we're going to look at is Ellis's ABC model. So Ellis put it into he said that depression is triggered by an activating event, so a negative event that might trigger irrational belief. For example, failing in an exam. These beliefs, which then that thoughts will come in someone's head that are irrational, and from those irrational thoughts and feelings, we have consequences of this behaviour. So it might be an emotional response or a behavioural response, like we've talked about. So getting a low mood, having low self-esteem, becoming angry, self-harming. So these are all the consequences of the irrational beliefs. Okay. It's the irrational beliefs which trigger the response, not the event itself. So, let's have a look. We tend to, right, when we're thinking irrationally, we tend to make demands on ourselves. Like, oh, I must get top grade in the class, and if I don't, then I'm stupid. identified as awfulising. Awful is described anything that's evaluated as being worse than 100% bad. If I don't succeed in my presentation, it will be awful. It's going to be the end of the world. We say catastrophising. It's it's going to be the most awful thing. Well, actually, is it so awful if your presentation goes a bit wrong? Well, no, it's never going to be the end of the world. The second type is low frustration tolerance. Otherwise known as I can't stand it. Basically, when someone is depressed, they feel like that's it. The minute something goes wrong, they just can't stand it. They've got to get out of there. They've got to stop. Lastly, the conditional self, otherwise known as self-drowning. If I don't get an A in a test, then I'm stupid. So a consequence of this irrational thinking can be to misperceive reality, to create unnecessary distance and conflict between ourselves and others, to not reach our goals, to experience inner turmoil and sadness, and basically kind of self-harm ourselves by these thoughts. Okay, so let's have another example. Alright, so here we've got Liz, activating event, declines Jez's offer of a second date. Poor old Jez. Jez believes he's worthless. He will never succeed with anymore, and he's a total failure just because Liz decided that she didn't want to go on a second date with him. Consequence, Right, so let's have a look at the evaluation of Beck's theory. There's lots of good supporting evidence. Grizzoli and Terry studied 65 pregnant women before and after birth and assessed how vulnerable their cognitive thought processes were, and found that there was a correlation between those who had poor cognitive or were very cognitively vulnerable before the birth and those that developed actually postnatal depression after the birth. It also has a great practical application in the fact that from it is developed cognitive behavioural therapy, which is extremely successful therapy at treating depression and other mental disorders. However, it doesn't explain all aspects of depression. It doesn't explain the extreme anger that some people can have, hallucinations, and bizarre beliefs. For example, Cotard syndrome, where people believe they're a zombie. I know it sounds strange, but it's true. Okay, let's have a look at the evaluation of Ellis's model. It is a partial explanation of depression. Most depression does tend to follow an activating event, and psychologists call this reactive depression, but not all does. Some people just get depressed for no reason, or no reason that we can identify, and perhaps this is when we could suggest that there might be a biological influence in depression, and not just a cognitive one. It does have practical application in the form of CBT, and Ellis developed his REBT, which we're going to look at next lesson, and it is also very successful. And it also doesn't explain all aspects of depression, as we mentioned before, extreme anger, hallucinations and bizarre